everyone, my name is Clay and welcome to Terminally Nerdy, and today I'm going to be reviewing the campaign setting The Ice Kingdoms by Mad Martian Games. This is a campaign setting designed specifically mostly for OSR based systems, 2nd Ed and 1st Ed D&D. There are conversion notes in it and I'll talk about those a little later, but primarily it is an OSR campaign setting. This campaign setting was given to me by Mad Martian Games for the purposes of this review, and I appreciate that. It's going to be the first thing I've actually reviewed on this channel that's tabletop related, so awesome. So what is the Ice Kingdoms? Well, it's a campaign setting about a land bridge in a nondescript, non-defined world that is essentially Norse and Viking themed with a definite Conan sword and sorcery feel. What that basically means is it's a land bridge, so it's a self-defined area. You have two continents on the side that are named but are never defined, and like a big kind of ocean below it and an ocean above it. But where they're focused is that bridge, that stretch of land in the frozen north where these people all live. I actually really appreciate that about the setting, specifically because it allows you to adapt it to pretty much anything. Do you want to put it in Pathfinder? Go ahead and put it in Galarian. I'm sure you can find a spot between two countries to stick a piece of land. Want to put it in the D&D setting? Boom. Done. I love it. I love that adaptability of it. What I don't like about it, I want to get this right out of the way, is the fact that it's based in OSR. And my problem with that is basically one of, I guess you'd call it reach. Because anyone who plays Tabletop now, getting into it now, is going to be playing 5th edition D&D. Or Pathfinder, those are the two big dogs. Maybe play World of Darkness. Maybe. But the two big daddies for fantasy are Pathfinder and 5th Ed. And both of those don't really work with OSR-based systems or rules, because OSR is based on 2nd edition D&D and 1st Ed, so they use things like THAC0 and proficiencies, both combat proficiencies and non-combat proficiencies, and things like exceptional strength. And if I'm saying all these words and you have no idea what any of it means, then you're new, and if you pick this up as a brand new GM, you might be highly confused by it. Also, one confusing thing is they use the term era rather than edition, and I have no idea why at all. Because it took me a minute to realize when they said second era games, they were referring to 2nd edition. Or third era games, they were referring to 3rd edition D&D. Come on, guys. Why are you changing up the terms there? It's weird. Beyond that kind of complaint I have that they essentially limited themselves really hard there, I have no other complaints with it. It is an extremely dense setting, it is extremely complicated mechanically, which is both good and bad, and it's extremely rich. They have a bunch of different parts in here. It starts off talking, for example, about the kingdoms of the setting, so like, how you play in it, how you deal with the cold and stuff. Basically, like kind of an overview. It goes right into the history of how the Ice Kingdoms were formed, how like the different areas were formed. Like they essentially have like a standard myth about like one great king and how there is no great king and his name is Arfhard and no one's like him and he united everything and then he disappeared. Not died, disappeared. And ever since then, you've got these tribes squabbling. It goes from there into talking about the clans and gladiators and basically kind of like the culture of the world, which was really interesting. They're doing a standard Viking culture. You've got, a couple of different clans. They have different ranks like thralls, carls, jarls. They have outcasts. They have standard guys. They bring in concepts like wereguilds, which is the price of a man's life. And like you use that if like somebody was murdered. You would call upon a wereguild to get, like, great compensation for the murder. They talk about diet, they talk about trade. They go really in-depth with actually a lot of that. So, I mean, there's an entire chart, for example, about the value of objects in barter. So, like, if you want to know a pound of silk and how much it's worth in barter, well, they got a chart for that. They even go so far as to talk about longships. They're Vikings. They're going to raid, need ships. Construction, the construction, the different kinds of ships, how those ships are navigated or controlled, etc. Then they go into the actual character and mechanical aspects, so specific stuff about classes, specific stuff about races, and specific stuff about levels and ability scores, common classing, dual classing, and all that. That's really my biggest problem with this, is all of that is mechanically second ed, but it uses like some third ed, and they use the terms interchangeably at times, it seems, and it gets kind of confusing. For example, they have a level cap arbitrarily at 15. Even in second ed, you could go as far as 20, but for some reason they cap all levels at 15, character level. And then if you meet like a deity, like a divine being, you can go up to 17. And then if you become like part of the divine deity, like divine being's entourage, and become like partially divine, you can go to 19. And at 19, you ascend to Valhalla, essentially, or to demons if you're playing an evil character. One thing that was really cool, though, is in here they bring up the fact that race-wise, the only races that are really playable are humans and dwarves, because elves are kind of evil, and this area being Norse, there's really nobody but humans, elves, and dwarves. It's a Norse thing. So what they did was they break up the humans into 6 subsets: the Einherjar, the Fenrir, the Hirdu, the Pojalan, the Urson, and the Varyig. And those are 6 distinct human races. They have their own stat bonuses, their own skill bonuses, their own lore, their own clans, etc., their own feel and flavor. Like the Urson are very bear-like, and they're kind of nomadic. The Fenrir are wolf-like and nomadic. The Varyig, I think, are the evil ones, if I remember correctly, and they eat people. The Pojalan are like dark humans, and they're kind of like, we don't trust those guys. So, I mean, it's actually very, very detailed in that. They've detailed the dwarves, which they call the Grungi. They have the standard ability score ranges and etc. It's actually very, very detailed. One thing I did mention at one point was the Sorcerer concept, which I want to bring up. They have a concept of a Sorcerer, which is sort of a multi-class character, which is a cleric magic user. It's a wizard for those of you who didn't play second ed. Which basically consorts with demons, and it takes up like a page, like an entire page, just to go over the sorcerer concept. It's bizarre. Again, highly detailed, highly complex, both in good and bad ways. From there, it goes into the magic system, which they use a rune system, actually. So casters in this don't really use spell books, they use runes. Those runes represent spells, and they learn runes as they go. They also bring up a couple of new magic spells and new magic items. I wasn't really too wowed with it, to be honest. It was just new spells and new magic items, and I was like, it fits. But it didn't really grab my attention. Then we got to the beginning of my favorite section of this book, and that was the myths and legends and the gods. I'm a huge sucker for mythology. In the Myths and Legends section, it goes over the creation of what they believe their creation myth to be, which is a great world tree, 2 brothers, one gets suckered into holding up the tree from above flames, and the other one, like, ascends, and he's like a frost giant and a fire giant. Eventually the frost giant births some gods, and he hears that one of them is going to try to kill him and will succeed, so he starts trying to kill them off. And then, essentially, their version of Fenris, which is a wolf mother, she hides the gods instead of killing them. She crafts some magic items for the god Uthin, who then essentially takes over. And then Uthin and Ymir. Ymir is like Uthin's brother. Ymir gets stuck under the tree and holding it up, I believe. It is really complex. It's essentially Norse creation myths with a different spin on them, which I like. And then it goes into some legends. So, for example, it goes into the legend of how the dwarves are created, and how, like, the Durgar and the gnomes, and how Uthin got mad and, like, ripped the soul out of them because one of them got, like, the king got too greedy. It goes into a discussion of hags, which are big in, like, Norse mythology. They're essentially, like, evil super witches. And talks about how, like, the first hag was actually supposed to be the first woman to birth mankind, and the other gods got jealous. They created, like, a hollow man, like a man with no soul who banged her. She birthed 7 super ugly kids, all female, who got pissed off at her, believed her at fault, tried to kill her, scarring her, and then she went and hid in a place called the Mornwood as the first hag, and then the other 7 basically populated the kingdoms. It's really fucked up. And then after that it goes into, like I said, the gods, which are both Norse and not Norse. So for example, their Odin analog is a guy named Uthin. But Uthin isn't control of fate, he doesn't have any fortune-telling powers, he has the one eye, the spear, wolves. He's basically Odin, but he doesn't have any of Odin's special powers that standard Viking mythology would suggest. There were a couple of oddball ones, though. There was one god, and I can't remember which one it was. I want to say it was Yadril, I think? Yes, it was Yadril. So, Yadril here... I want to talk about her specifically, because she don't make no sense. So she is a chaotic evil goddess. A lesser goddess, by the way, who is basically, she is the opposite of the 4 fates. That's right, they have 4 fates, not 3 in this. So she's chaotic evil for alignment. Now, that would normally dictate what kind of domains or things that she is over, mechanically. But for some reason, she's over chaos. Makes sense. Knowledge. Guess that makes sense. She's about pattern recognition and turning chaos into kind of order. And law. Which doesn't really make sense to me. Like, looking at that, I'm like, why would she be chaotic evil have anything to do with law? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't bother me too much, though, because she's essentially Little Miss, you know, everything happens for a reason, and we're here to make sure that reason happens intelligently. It's kind of weird. She's unique, though. I like it. I like all the gods, actually. They've got, like I said, 4 fates, the standard 3 female fates, and the one who kind of looks over their work. There's a male who kind of deals with the fates. A lot of stuff like that. Again, very detailed, lots of information. If for nothing else, I would love to use just the gods, because they're interesting. After the gods, though, it goes into the geography of the Ice Kingdoms. That was not as detailed as I expected. It has maps, really good color maps in it, which are really cool looking, really well done. I love, like, each little map section. But, like, I wanted to know more about the Mornwood, for an example. And it's got 2 or 3 paragraphs about it, and that's it. Instead, it goes over, like, you know, the mountainous regions. It talks about the weather. In fact, it actually has a map showing where weather patterns would be. Like, this area would be extremely cold. This area has storms, which is surprisingly detailed. In a weird way. I don't think I've ever seen a map about weather in a campaign setting. After geography, it goes into a detailed description of the city of Arfhendheim, which is the first city, I guess you'd call it, created by the guy who started the whole kingdoms and the clans. It gives a really detailed look at that city. It goes over the 5 sections of that city, which they call vets, which are the out city, the ghetto and in the wall, the area between 2 walls, the Thanehold, or basically the Cloud District if you watch Skyrim, and then a temple city, like a sister city called Averheim. And then it talks about a dungeon that exists under the city called the Grunjunion. I have butchered that, and I guarantee it. It's Grungineoan. I have no idea how to pronounce that. It's basically Undermountain is created by dwarves. So they've actually given you, as a DM, a city to set things in, and an entire dungeon that the players could explore if you just want to run a dungeon crawl, which is really cool. It talks about the politics. Talks about a really fucked up thing called the Garden of Woe, which is basically like the crucifix fields, only they're just standing stones. Which is really messed up, but apparently if you survive that, you survive 3 days strapped to these stones, you get to join a city called Tenebris, an area outside of Arfheim, where these people who have survived that have gained mystical powers. It's weird, and they don't really explain that. They talk about a specific farm with another dungeon underneath it. So they give you a lot of detail about this one city and the area around it. They're basically saying this is where you probably want to set like your first adventures if you're going to create your own, because there's a lot more detail about that region than about the rest of the entire region of the land bridge. Then they go into the flora and fauna, just talking about things like the different kinds of monsters and creatures you might run into. Stuff like goblins, elves, haglings, kobolds. They got minotaurs. They specifically bring up something called mountain apes, sea monsters. It's a classic Viking thing. Orcs, ogres, trolls, undead, wolves, because wolves are important, and wyverns. And then they talk about the common trees, because I need to know about the trees. Again, it's super detailed in some of the weirdest ways. I guess if a player decides what kind of trees are around me, you can tell them, well, there's some birch and some oak. The next section after that is all about the conversions. Because again, this is Osric. This is designed for OSR. Osric, Labyrinth Lord, Basic Fantasy Role-Playing. Which, by the way, I actually do have. This is an OSR system. One of these days I'll talk about this. It's basically, OSR is essentially upgraded 2nd edition D&D. So you're dealing with stuff, again, like I said, THAC0, and proficiencies, and multi-classing, and dual-classing, and all these weird rules about that stuff, and exceptional strength. So they give you some conversion notes if you want to use it outside of those systems mechanically. But to be honest, the conversion rules are a little wonky at times. Like, exceptional strength, they're talking like a 19 strength would equate to like a 24. That's ridiculous. But at least they have it, so it's handy. But it would take some work. Just looking at them, just reading through the conversion stuff, it would take some work to get the hang of creating, like, rebuilding the classes and races that they're presenting to rebuild them for 3rd edition or 4th edition or 5th edition. After that, they go into a small bestiary, so they talk about haglings, they talk about ice elves, ice hags, minotaurs, orcs. They got a couple of other things. They have a thing called stone dwarves, which live in that grungeon dungeon again, which are basically these creepy dwarves infected by a moss, that if you eat the moss, it like takes over your entire body. And then they got a couple of different were creatures. They basically have a were horse, a were centaur, and a were rat. It then goes into a section just for GMs, talking about how some adventure ideas like raids and defense and some politics and stuff like that. Different kinds of threats that you might run into, like frostmen or rival thanes, because a lot of it's going to be thane on thane, you know. The thane of clan A is angry at the thane of clan B, war happens. It's a Viking thing. Then it goes into a section about standard spells and which clerical sphere they might show up in. That's got a calendar, some constellations, some name ideas, a codex for something called Aorden, which I didn't really get. I'm guessing it's supposed to be like the plane of existence this takes place in. And then, of course, it goes into specifically different games. So, like, if you're going to play, like, original era, you'd play Sword and Wizardry or Dungeons and Dragons. If you're going to play in 2nd edition, you might play Advanced D&D or Hackmaster for Golden Glory. Basically gives you some names of different editions of different games that you could use this for, what are some common ones, which is actually really cool, because some of these I didn't even know existed, like Myth and Magic. That's a new one. Didn't know about that one. Osric and Labyrinth Lord I've heard of but never knew about. Basic Fantasy Role-Playing I've got over here. Mazes and Perils and Blueholm is a new one. So that's kind of weird. And then, of course, it has the Open Gaming license. So, overall, I'm really actually impressed with this. It's got some great art. I've been circulating the art in this corner, just pictures that I liked in some of the maps and stuff, just on, like, a loop. And I really like the settings fluff, and I really like the settings breakdown of everything. I'm not a fan of the OSR-based rules, but I'm not a fan of 2nd edition, and I did grow up on that. That was my 1st edition, so I know exactly what exceptional strength and THAC0 and all that nonsense is. I just don't like it. Do I think this is worth the $15 that the PDF is going for? If you're looking for a Viking-themed setting, yes. Yes, 100 times yes. The best part about this setting for me is that it's a land bridge. It's not a world, it's just a section. So like if you want, like if I'm playing 5th edition and I'm playing in like my created world up here and I get them out of the Veil, they could run into this, and I have an entire section of a world laid out for me with its own like rules and its own cultures and stuff, and I don't have to think about it. It's really, really adaptable in that way, and I really like that. I really like how super detailed like the different variants of human are. So like, you know, running into a Fenrir is different from running into an Einhjar. They are different peoples. They grow up differently. They're in different cultures. I really like that. I like how they go into the festivals. I like the really detailed gods, even if a couple of them kind of weird me out. You know, I like how they distrust magic and everything. I like the setting as a whole. I can't say if it's worth $25 to buy a physical copy. Unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy. Like I said, they gave me a PDF. And because of that, I can't really speak to the quality in the production of a physical book. So keep that in mind. For $15, if you're looking for a Norse Viking themed setting, regardless of what system you play, this is a good buy. If you're playing one of the OSR or first or second ed things, this is a phenomenal system, or a phenomenal setting, really. Especially if you're looking for Viking-based sword and sorcery. You know, it's got its niche, and it does its niche well. I just really wish they would have not focused on just that niche. But maybe it was the guys who made it, that's what they like, and I can't blame them for it. If you guys want to purchase it, there will be links in the description box for a physical copy, which I believe you can get on Lulu and Amazon, and then there'll be the PDF copy, which you can get on DriveThruRPG. If you have any questions for me, just leave them in the comments below. I hope the Mad Martian Games enjoyed this little my going over all the different sections of it. If you like what I'm doing, hit that like button. If you don't like what I'm doing, hit the dislike button. Feel free to subscribe for more reviews and shenanigans. I actually have more reviews. I've got 2 books here, another one coming in the mail, and I have to review paper minis. So that happened. So hopefully this will, you know, prep for more informative reviews. That's the word I'm looking for. As always, folks, thanks for watching, and remember, stay nerdy!